And so, I think that one thing, to be perfectly transparent, at least for where I'm coming from, that this gathering, at least the way I interpret this gathering is to try and heighten our collective awareness and understanding about the very serious systems of oppression that keep us from coming together. That keep our strategies and the resources that we're investing into putting a stop to the tar sands madness from having a convergence, okay, if you will. And I think that, part of the objective, I think, of our time together this afternoon is to really sit back, take a step back, spend some time with each other, and give you all an opportunity to share the wealth of insight that you have from your experiences, either working in the tar sands in your organizations or wherever you're at, but also what you learned here this weekend, okay? And I think that this is critical because I talked about legacy of work that has already been done. And in the case, I think, of Indigenous resistance and the fight for the recognition of our treaty rights and our inherent rights, in other words, our God-given rights that we have as the first people of this land, the 5 Dene reservations, I believe it's 5, correct? That are within the tar sands region? Fort Mac, yeah. As well as the Cree communities and the Métis communities have done a lot of incredible work. In particular, the work that I'm familiar with is, of course, the Mikisew Cree Nation, who has done a lot of interventions to both federal and provincial regulatory bodies to make sure that people understand within those institutions that there is resistance and that there is concern. And I think part of the objective of this afternoon's conversation and the purpose that we're talking about racism, that we're talking about class, that we're talking about just all of the things that keep us divided, is to try and break down some of those barriers, because there's a very real human face to the tar sands, and there's very real human rights implications to the tar sands. And I think one of the things, at least from IEN's perspective, is how do we reframe how we approach organizing on this issue, in terms of how do we look at it from the perspective of how is what our actions do in our own camps going to assist the very real violence that is occurring in the local communities that are bearing the brunt of the fossil fuel regime in the Fort McMurray region and upstream and downstream from it. Because yeah, we're all impacted, but the reality of it is some people are impacted a hell of a lot more. And there's a very real need to respond to that and to at least be aware of it. Because there's a bunch of little things happening, little firecrackers going off here and there, but how do we focus that into a much more precise and effective strategy that takes into account not just the ecological implications of the tar sands, but also the human rights question, okay? And how do we bring that together so that we're not just being egocentric in our own little fishbowl, but how do we actually make this, how do we turn this into a total response that takes into account all of these incredibly intense dynamics, that are going on right now. And so I think, just to put it out there, IEN has been working on our Native Energy and Climate campaign, putting it together for the last 5 years. We haven't launched an actual campaign per se. That's this year, where we're linking up all of the targeting of our indigenous communities from the North Slope of Alaska to Mexico, and trying to demonstrate to the world the realities that industry targets our communities disproportionately to site these kinds of toxic waste, toxic facilities, and that there's very real racism in that targeting that sets energy policy and development practices. And the tar sands is probably the epicenter, if you will, of the North American energy infrastructure that has been built on the backs of indigenous peoples. And so in that context, we need to have a very real discussion about how collectively we can bring our movements together, because we have been divided. The environmentalists, they're doing good work, but they're getting their asses kicked, and we're definitely getting our asses kicked And local communities are suffering unjustly as a result of that, and people are dying, you know, daily. And so we've got to take all of these things into consideration in our conversation today. And that's not to say that this group is going to solve all the problems, but what we're trying to do with this space this afternoon is to have a cross-pollination of ideas, of understandings, so that all of you can leave here with a much deeper analysis and a much deeper sensitivity to how you do your work, okay? So that you take into consideration when you, for those of you that organize in the cities, you know, when we're coming up for sustainable solutions for our urban centers, we've got to take into consideration that, hey, yeah, maybe clean coal technologies might help with the carbon issue, but there's no such thing as clean coal strip mining, you know? Concepts like this, you know, we need to think about. And so